The preseason starts today for the Pelicans, and I'm going to tell you why the starters clicking, Jordan Hawkins shooting, and big men making an impact are the most important things to watch for in this game. It's a game day episode of Locked On Pelicans. Let's go.
You are Locked On Pelicans, your daily New Orleans Pelicans podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to another edition of Locked On Pelicans, the daily podcast covering your favorite team, the New Orleans Pelicans and NBA, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, available wherever you get your podcasts and available on YouTube. I'm your host, Pelicans Insider, credential member of the media, Jake Madison, at NOLA Jake on Twitter, here with y'all on this game day for the Pelicans. Kind of weird early tip-off time around noon because of the Saints preseason game, but it is the one home preseason game for the Pelicans in the season. We get some real basketball today, so in a sense, it is starting, even if it's just preseason, but I'm excited. Today's episode of Locked On Pelicans is brought to you by FanDuel. You can start the season with a big return on FanDuel. Place your first $5 bet and you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. And of course, thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen. Today and every day, we're here Monday through Friday, the #1 Pelicans podcast, covering everything you want to know about this Pelicans team. So please subscribe wherever you get your podcasts and join over 10,000 Pelicans fans on YouTube as well. And let's dive in. Become an everydayer. Listen Monday through Friday to Locked On Pelicans. So they're taking on their first preseason game here in the Smoothie King Center, and I am excited about everything. Taking on the Orlando Magic at 12:30, basically a noon tip-off time. So what are we watching for? What's important when it comes to this team? Because there are still a lot of unanswered questions with them. So I've got three really important things that goes into all of that. So I want to start with, well, the starters. The likely starting group that we're expecting is Dejounte Murray, CJ McCollum, Brandon Ingram, Herb Jones, and Zion Williamson. The big question right now is, can that kind of lineup, that group, work? Right now, with the Trey Murphy injury, that's likely the best five guys that they can put on the court at the same time. But it is an untraditional lineup. So there are more questions than answers about him. Some of the small ball sample size around Zion Williamson has been good. And by the way, Willie Green, after training camp practice the other day, said, Zion's not a five. He's not going to be playing the five. We might run lineups with no traditional center, but it doesn't mean it's Zion at the five. So we need to take that out of our vocabulary. Fair enough. But the starters need to win their minutes. They did not win their minutes last season. And if you're an everydayer or a longtime listener, you kind of know this point already. And if you're a new listener, this is going to be important for the season because it's going to be something that we're going to be looking at a lot. Can the starters win their minutes? Last year, the answer was no for New Orleans. Now, there were a lot of injuries, guys in and out of the lineup. That plays a factor too. But they were winning a lot of those games by beating up on bench units while the starters just largely played even or slightly behind the opponent's starters. That's not how you win playoff games or playoff series at the NBA level. And it can be tough in the regular season too. You want to put your best five out there, and you want that lineup to be your most effective lineup, especially over a large sample size. It wasn't for New Orleans last year. They need to figure out a starting group that is going to win their minutes because some of the depth on this team, Dyson Daniels, Najee Marshall, Larry Nance Jr., even Jonas Valanciunas, if you want to call him a depth piece, are gone. And other guys are going to need to step up, and we'll look at Jordan Hawkins in a minute here. But the starters need to carry this team. Will they be able to? I do think there is potential for this group to work really well. We heard at Media Day from David Griffin, from Willie Green, from GM Bryson Graham that they feel that these untraditional, unconventional, we'll call them small ball lineups, can actively work. They need to commit to rebounding. So are they trying to get out in transition and run after a miss? Because defensively, I think this lineup should be good. Or are they trying to go for those misses, corral them, and then just try and sprint out, even if you're not in full-blown transition? In the backcourt with Dejounte Murray and Herb Jones, the defense can be special because they're going to be forcing a lot of steals. New Orleans was good at this. They were top 5 in steals and deflections last season. They like to kind of hunt that ball and force a turnover and get out and run, and that's a really great, easy way to do it. But they also need to know that if you do gamble and someone shoots, you're going to be out of position to grab that defensive board, and it might lead to second chance opportunities for your opponent. That's not good, and the team needs to commit to rebounding. That's why partially we feel Trey Murphy should be in this starting lineup over CJ McCollum, even though CJ had an incredible shooting year last season. So how is this going to work? Will it work? Willie Green said the starters will play about 20 minutes, and maybe he throws a curveball at us, and we see Daniel Theis in there, more on Daniel Theis and the rest of the bigs later in the show. So they need to figure out if this lineup works. And what I mean by figure out if it works is it needs to pass the eye test. I don't care about the points scored. Sometimes you're going to look at this and you'll see them miss shots. Right now, it's about process over results. Does that unit look like it works together? Are they generating open threes even if those threes aren't falling? Because with that group, there's enough three-point shooting out there that it can be good. Particularly, and this is one of the reasons why I'm also going to be watching the starters very intensely in this game, is with Brandon Ingram. If he's shooting threes, if he's playing downhill and not settling for mid-range jumpers, this lineup has the shooting that it needs. So what does his shot profile look like? Are they running actions together? Are people working off ball? Basically, how does Dejounte Murray fit in as a point guard? Something that they've needed. CJ transitioned to more of an off-ball role last year, and he was phenomenal. We know what Zion's capable of doing. Herb's going to be open in the corners, and he'll probably take and make those threes. And then that leaves Ingram and Zion. We know what they're capable of doing. So, along with Murray. So I feel pretty confident that this lineup has a lot of talent, but does it actually work? Is there something that's derailing it? Process over results in this case. In those 20 minutes that they play together, does it look like this is a unit that would beat others? We want them to pass the eye test. If the stats back it up, that's great too. But we're not going to just go, oh, well, they made a bunch of shots and that's great. Are they wide open looks? Is it driving kicks from Zion, from Ingram, from Murray? Are they running more pick and rolls? Are they doing inverted pick and rolls with Zion as the ball handler and maybe BI as the screener for pick and pop opportunities? What are they doing out there on the court that's working? We're going to break it down in tomorrow's episode of Locked On Pelicans. This is probably going to be what we lead with. Did the starters win their minutes? Did the starters pass the eye test? I'm hopeful that it's going to be a yes, but we'll break it down in tomorrow's episode of Locked On Pelicans. So coming up next, Jordan Hawkins is having an incredible training camp from reports. What does that mean for his role this coming season, and in particular in this game? Let's break that down coming up here next in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. Today's episode of Locked On Pelicans is sponsored by BetterHelp. Halloween lets us have fun with what scares us. But what about those fears that don't include zombies and ghosts? Therapy is a great tool for facing your fears and finding ways to overcome them, because sometimes the scariest thing is not facing our fears in the first place and holding ourselves back. Look, I actually really subscribe to that. There was something that I was just kind of putting off, didn't want to do. It was uncomfortable. I was actually a little scared involving a phone call, and I just did it, and I felt better. It was literally something keeping me up at night. Sometimes it's not just as simple as a phone call that you can overcome or fix. Sometimes there's a more complex solution and you need help for it. And that's what therapy can really do for you. Therapy is not just about people who've experienced, major trauma. It's how to set boundaries, basically empowering you to be your best version of yourself or learn positive coping skills. So if you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. What I love about it is it's all online, so it's convenient and suited to your schedule. So overcome your fears with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/LockedOnNBA to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/LockedOnNBA to get started. And thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We're here Monday through Friday, the #1 Pelicans podcast, covering everything you want to know about this Pelicans team. So please subscribe wherever you get your podcast. Join over 10,000 Pelicans fans on YouTube as well. We are the #1 Pelicans podcast for a reason. I'm excited for the season to start. So whether you've been with me for a long time as an everydayer, an every other dayer, or you're a new listener, I'm happy you're here. You're going to get coverage all season long. We're going to be here Monday through Friday, probably a whole bunch of bonus shows, live shows too. We'll be doing in-person events as we've done the past couple of years. There's going to be other content as well. It's going to be a lot of fun. So I'm excited to be here with y'all, and I appreciate you making Locked On Pelicans part of your routine. Now for your second listen, Locked On NBA. We're there Monday through Friday. It's going to be Monday through Sunday. Sneak peek. Locked On NBA, breaking down every single game all season long. Catch up on everything going on around the association with the Locked On NBA podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So let's keep going as the Pelicans take on the Orlando Magic and what we are watching for in this game, the most important things to keep an eye on. I want to go into this part with second-year guard Jordan Hawkins, former first-round pick who had at times an up and down season last year. The shooting was there at times. Who can forget that game over the Dallas Mavericks? I almost forgot it, clearly, where he had 34 points, 35 points, I think it was, and looked like he was going to be a feature in the rotation going forward, but not good defense. Bad defense really held him back with that too, and that wasn't something that was great for him if he wants to really stake out a spot in the rotation for this team. But he has been having an unbelievable training camp. I talked to a couple people with the team who are there watching the full practices, and they say he barely has missed. He's taking multiple different kinds of threes, off balance, catch and shoot, spot up, whatever type of threes they need, he is taking them and he is making them. And this is important and very good for a handful of reasons. Number one being more shooting, please. The Pelicans need to get up more threes. It's really as simple as that, particularly with Trey Murphy III out for a period of time to start the year. If you haven't listened to that episode, I kind of break down when we might see him back and what it does for the rest of the team and the rotation. That was in Friday's episode of Locked On Pelicans. So you need more shooting. It really falls on Brandon Ingram to make up for the lack of shooting that you're going to be missing to make up for the missing shooting from Trey Murphy being out. But Jordan Hawkins is going to be important too. More shooting. They just need it. Every team needs it. One of the things to keep in mind too is when he fits well next to Zion. And then two is when you look at some of those lineups that were really successful last year, those bench lineups anchored by like CJ McCollum or Ingram or Zion where just one of them was on the floor, it had a defender and it had a shooter. Well, okay, that could be Trey, that could be someone else. Right now, it's going to be Jordan Hawkins. It's kind of as simple as that when you look at the roster here. Bench lineups worked really well when you put a shooter or two, ideally two, out there on the court. If he can do that, he can really become a staple in those type of units, those lineups that are something that the Pelicans can still weaponize and use to beat opponents, even if you also need the starters to pull more of their own weight. In Summer League, he was trying different things. It didn't look particularly good. He was running a lot of pick and rolls in Summer League, which is not something that he'll be asked to do on this team. I want him just simply be a shooter and be an elite one at that draws the attention of the defense. So Summer League was him trying to do different things. Now it's do what you do best and defend. Make threes and try and defend. Defense is what gets you on the court. Offense is what keeps you there. That's according to Karlo Makovic, who I interviewed one-on-one at Media Day. Go look at that on the Locked On Pelicans YouTube page. But there's also, while defense gets you on there, look, if a shooter is so freaking good, sometimes you just can't ignore him and you're forced to play him. And is Hawkins that guy? Is Hawkins that guy? This is the first game action we're going to see him in for, since the end of last season, up and down. But they need that kind of shooting. They need those shooting threats, particularly around a guy like Zion Williamson. And now with a point guard that can maybe orchestrate your offense a little bit better and get him some better looks. So the other thing with him too is he's a movement shooter. He can cut, he can run off pin downs, curl, catch the ball, rip it, and fire it. They don't really have another guy like that that's elite at that sort of thing. And that's going to keep the defense moving. That's going to open other people up. If Hawkins is that guy, you can sub him in for CJ. You can work a bench lineup with him and Devontae Green, and those lineups can be really, really effective. So the second point I want to make about him needing to have a breakout year and wanting to see it in this preseason game and carry over that training camp for him is, as much as we maybe don't want to talk about it, it's also good for trade value. Shooters are needed, and the Pels lack some mid-tier salary to be able to facilitate trades. There's no one other than Herb Jones making like more than between $6 million and like $15 million. You need some of that mid-tier salary to be able to trade, to find a deal to get something done. Now, if Hawkins breaks out and becomes a valuable asset around the league, you can include him in a trade along with, I don't know, say Jose, which I don't want to happen, to go and get a guy like Mitchell Robinson when he's healthy. Not now, but when he's healthy. Or Robert Williams from Portland, who did just get injured. They don't really have any sort of way in a one-on-one trade to go and do that. Maybe you do it as a 3-team deal, but those are really hard to figure out and sometimes even just get done. And the more complex those are, the less a chance of them happening is. So if this team wants to be able to upgrade the roster, whether it's at the center position or another wing or who knows, whatever it might be, you need Hawkins to maybe break out to increase his trade value, and that means you can go and get said player, whatever that player might be, whoever that player might be, a whole lot easier. Not saying I only want him to get good for them to trade him. I would love it if he's stuck here. There's a lot of shooting potential in him, but he's going to need to show a little bit more well-roundedness too. Shooting and defense, but can he rebound? And I think he can. He plays taller than he actually is, but if he's a defensive issue again, and he's not shooting lights out, what can you do here? And does that just kind of leave you with a talented and useful player that doesn't fully fit into everything you're doing? I'm not sure. So you want to see his trade value go up for everything. By the way, speaking of trade value, I saw the report, read the report because I subscribed to a Substack from Mark Stein. That one's a really, really good one if you want kind of like inside information around the league here, where Mark Stein said that the New York Knicks, when they were looking for a center to put in their front court with that injury to Mitchell Robinson before the Karl Anthony Towns trade, had called the Utah Jazz about Walker Kessler, and they wanted 2 first-round picks. 2 first-round picks for Walker Kessler. I don't love that idea for Walker Kessler. I wouldn't trade 2 first-round picks for him. I would trade 1. I don't think I would do 2. I understand why they want 2, but there's a reason now why he's still with the Utah Jazz and not with another team. He could be a useful rebounding, rim-protecting big man, but maybe you have that on the roster. And that's also what we're going to talk about in the next segment here. 2 first-round picks for Walker Kessler seems a little bit rich. The Pelicans, if they're determined to upgrade the center position, one would have gotten him already. Or wait, maybe in hopes that his value goes down a little bit and they can maybe get him for cheaper later. But he also just fits into a traded player exception, so you don't need to even send out matching salary. He also makes so little that you can actually get a deal done, and that's a valuable thing too. That's still going to be a name to keep an eye on all season long, particularly if it looks like that starting unit without a center doesn't work. And they just feel they need to go and get someone and they don't trust Daniel Theis or one of the other guys on the roster. That's something that is we're going to keep an eye on all season long, at least a little bit. We're not going to be like doing Walker Kessler watch or center trade watch every single day here. But we do want to kind of see how that's fitting in, what the Pelicans might do. And of course, when we kind of have a better idea from talking to people around the team in the league, we will share that with you right here on the Locked On Pelicans podcast. So speaking of big men, Daniel Theis, Karlo Makovic, Trey Jemison, Yves Missi. What are we going to see from them? What are we expecting from them in this game? Let's look at that, because if one of those guys breaks out, that's a game changer for the New Orleans Pelicans, and I'll explain why that's coming up here next in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. Today's episode of Locked On Pelicans is brought to you by FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Hey, NFL fans and NBA fans, you can start this season with a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So when you get a hunch in the middle of a game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. And you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. Really simple. You can even get in on this now. It doesn't have to be for the Saints and their game against the Kansas City Chiefs tonight, which is why you're not getting this game later, and this game is at 12:30. The Chiefs, by the way, are a 5.5-point favorite. If you think the Saints are going to have a big bounce back game, or Kansas City, despite having a winning record, doesn't look that good to me at times, maybe you want to get that plus 5.5. Or if you just want to go Pels, their opening night line against the Chicago Bulls, -6.5 at home against that team. I like that number a lot. You can go place $5 on either of those, and you're going to get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. And all you got to do, just go to FanDuel.com, America's #1 sportsbook. And thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We're here Monday through Friday, the #1 Pelicans podcast, covering everything you want to know about this Pelicans team. So please subscribe wherever you get your podcast. Join over 10,000 Pelicans fans on YouTube as well. By the way, we are completely free Monday through Friday and become an everydayer. That means you listen Monday through Friday. And now for your second listen, Locked On Saints. Ross Jackson making sense of everything black and gold for y'all, getting you set for the Monday night game. Going to recap the Monday night game as soon as it's done. He's there in Kansas City, by the way, boots on the ground type of coverage. Make sure Locked On Saints is your second listen today. So let's start to wrap up the show as we're looking at the first preseason game. Oh, it's so nice, isn't it, to talk about like real basketball on the court, not potential Brandon Ingram trades or other things like that. It just feels nice to like watch some basketball. I will be there in the Smoothie King Center with y'all at noon, lunchtime game, which I kind of like, but also ew. And then, of course, we're going to recap it tomorrow. The show will probably be out a little bit later tomorrow night. The next couple weeks are a little bit crazy here, but we're going to make the best of it on Locked On Pelicans. So, final thing that I'm really looking for in this game is who stands out of the bigs. They should all get some run. Daniel Theis is presumably at the top of the pecking order, maybe potentially starting. After that, it's kind of wide open for who maybe gets minutes. Karlo Makovic, Trey Jemison, rookie Yves Missi. Well, I guess all, two of those guys are rookies in Karlo and Missi. Jemison did get some, good run with the Memphis Grizzlies last year. Who separates themselves? Who differentiates themselves? They all do things differently. Do any of those skills seemingly like really work with the starters? Daniel Theis is a really good screen setter and can shoot the three ball, even if he's not great, but I'd argue he's the worst starting center in the league if he ends up starting. He's also a little bit undersized at 6'8", but he's played particularly well for Germany. He's also way tougher than you think. He is. I'd argue he's maybe one of the toughest guys, if not the toughest on the team. I kind of like having that edge to him a little bit and what he brings to the roster with all of that. After that, though, things are wide open. Karlo Makovic has professional experience playing in Europe, played with Birmingham last season, seemingly knows what he needs to do. It seems that it's been communicated to him well. When I talked to him one-on-one at Media Day, you should go watch that interview on the Locked On Pelicans YouTube page. He talked about, he's got to be a defensive presence, and that's how he's get on the court. But once he's on the court, he needs to make some threes, try and space the court. He also needs to play in the pick and roll. And when you look at all of these bigs, Theis, Karlo, Jemison, and Missi, the one that I would trust the most in the pick and roll really is Karlo Makovic. Theis isn't a pick and roll big. Missi is too raw and we don't really know. Trey Jemison's big, but a little bit lumbery. And is he more of a bruiser down below? Probably yes. Karlo can work in the pick and roll, probably at the top of the 3-point line or in a short roll situation where they're running some screens around the free throw line. I like that idea for him. We saw it in Summer League. Now, Summer League isn't the best place for a big man to shine, and you're playing against real subpar competition. But to me, he moved like an NBA player. Well, now he's going to get a chance to do it against other NBA players and not just Summer League guys. So I'm excited to see what he's capable of doing out there. I've done a previous show on this for the Everydayers where this team really needs him to develop quickly and break out and be NBA ready. I'm a little skeptical we'll see it right away, but I'm certainly hopeful. He seems to have the right attitude of what he needs to do, and I think that's a really exciting thing. So I like the idea of seeing some extended run for Karlo Makovic, and I think with the Summer League performances that he had, you're going to see that he gets some minutes in this. If the starters are only playing about 20 or so, it's going to really be open for other guys. You've got to pair him with a point guard, so you want to see him alongside Jose Alvarado and others in this game too. But I'm excited to see what he's capable of bringing. And then there's Trey Jemison. Can you just be a good enough force down low? Can you go and muscle some people out of the way? With him, what I'm watching, not as the scoring or anything else like that, because this team doesn't need that, but is the rebounding. His rebounding numbers were not great in the 25 games that he played for Memphis last year. If he wants to get out on the court, it's going to be defense and in particular rebounding. Can he rebound? You can't let other people beat you for boards if you want to play this and be a center that's in the rotation for the New Orleans Pelicans. I worry about that with him. We'll see. But if he comes out and just acts as like a beast on the boards, that's like a paradigm shifter for this team. And from him, he could be a backup big man because Willie Green tends to, rely on those type of experienced veterans. You could see that happening pretty easily. We want to see Karlo play. We want to see Missi play, but Trey Jemison kind of has the makings of a Willie Green guy. Now, Willie Green does seem like he's growing. It's open who the starters are going to be, and he's open to starting an unconventional, non-traditional, whatever you want to call it, small ball lineup. That's encouraging. We weren't expecting that from him. So maybe Trey Jemison isn't a Willie Green kind of guy, but there's some makings there based off of past things. He's been doing well in training camp from what I've been told. Everyone's doing well in training camp, but there are a few people like Hawkins and Ingram that you want to take special note of. And then what about Yves Missi? The highlights coming out from training camp have him getting up. The dude's got some crazy athleticism. They need rim protection. Of all the guys we've mentioned here, he's the one that probably is going to give it to you more than anybody else. Some shot blocking. Now, the Pelicans' defensive scheme doesn't really rely on rim protection. It's denying people just even getting into the paint in the first place and really playing a more perimeter-focused style and then forcing turnovers and getting out and running off of steals that way. But if you have rim protection, if you get some shot blocking, that is truly only it's laying up. It's a luxury. That's a great thing to have that this team doesn't, and it means they can run some different lineups. They can give you some different looks than they otherwise wouldn't be able to do. So if Missi goes out, and with what I'm watching for him is don't foul. Just don't commit bad fouls. I don't care if you're particularly effective. I just want to see you actively trying and not fouling. And I'm going to be thrilled with him if that is the case. We get some real preseason today. We get to see Pelicans players in uniforms on the court doing all of the things. It's going to be a lot of fun. I'm going to be there. If you are and you see me, please say hi. And we're going to recap this tomorrow. We'll probably look back on a lot of these things, right? The starters and how they did. We'll break it down. Hawkins and whoever had a big performance. And then we'll evaluate all the bigs again and see what we've learned and what it can maybe help us understand about this team as we gear up for an important season here in New Orleans. So as always, I'm your host, Jake Madison, at NOLA Jake on Twitter. This is the Locked On Pelicans podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And I'll be back with y'all tomorrow to recap the game.